This section is 10.2, which is dealing with adaptations and variations. Two words that you should have been familiar with already from some of the definitions you needed to do prior to beginning your coursework for Chapter 10. So this is correlated to section 10.2 in the book, and something that I do want you to know before we get any further is this information will be used for a project for you immediately following this particular discussion. So to start with, two words that you are already familiar with are variation and adaptation. So a quick review on those two words. Variation is the difference in the physical traits of an individual between other individuals of the same species. So variation, differences in a trait within the same species. And we're going to be looking at some examples of variations. An adaptation is something that allows an organism to survive better in the environment that it lives in. And we'll be looking at some examples of adaptations here shortly as well. Now there's two types of variation that you have not seen yet, that being interspecific variation and intraspecific variation. So let's start by looking at intraspecific variations. Well, the prefix intra means within. In other words, within the same species. So within the same species variations. We're looking at tigers here, and we can see that a trait that both of these tigers have is the stripe pattern. So a black stripe here, black stripe here. And notice that the stripe patterns here and here are different. Now, because these stripe patterns are different on these two different tigers, that is said to be a variation. Differences within the same trait. In this case, the trait would be the stripe pattern. Intraspecific would be simply comparing one tiger to another tiger, that being because they're in the same species. So once again, intraspecific variations compare variations of a trait within two members of the same species. Interspecific variation, we'll be looking at differences in traits, variation, between two members of two different species. And the prefix inter means between. So we have two different species here, between two different species. So between species variation. An example on this would be, once again, you could use the exact same trait. You could use the stripe pattern. Well, his variation is he has a stripe pattern, and his variation he doesn't have a stripe pattern. You could also look at length of the hair. Relatively short, but this tiger does have some regions, or lion, I'm sorry, does have some regions where the hair is quite longer on the mane. Other forms of variation could be height. The height of tigers and the height of lions are not the same. You could also look at length. The length of tigers is not the same as the length of lions. I'm pretty sure that tigers are considerably longer than lions. So interspecific variation, variation between members of two different species. Alright, so looking at adaptations, we looked at variations, which was the first vocab word for this section. Now we're going to be looking at adaptations. In particular, we're looking at a clownfish. And if you recall, an adaptation is something that this clownfish has that will help it survive better in the environment that it lives in. So let's talk a little bit about what this guy has that allows him to survive in this particular environment. To start with, let's look at the environment that he lives in. This kind of cool looking soft feathery thing is a sea anemone. Now, here's the thing about sea anemones. Each one of these little sticks is, well, it contains poison. You do not want to touch one of these. If you do, you'll have a bunch of poison injected into your skin. However, if we look at this clownfish, the clownfish is actually touching a bunch of those. And that's because the clownfish is resistant to the toxins that the sea anemone produces. In this case, this guy is unaffected by the sea anemone toxins. So how does that adaptation help this guy survive better in this environment? Well, think about a predator. When a predator comes along, where can this clownfish go? Well, he can just burrow right into the sea anemone. He's safe, and the predator probably will leave him alone because the predator isn't immune to these toxins. So that's one example of how this clownfish can survive better in this environment. Next, let's look at some adaptations of mako sharks. Sharks are awesome. They have a ton of adaptations that help them survive well in their environment. So to start with, sharks. Some things that you may or may not know about them. Well, one of the things that they have that helps them survive is their body's shape. And as we can see, it's almost shaped like a torpedo. Well, how does that help a mako shark survive better in its environment? Well, a mako shark, it lives in open water. It never stops swimming. That being said, when there's food and it needs to hunt, it can swim through the water very, very fast because of the shape of its body. In other words, it can survive better in its environment because of the shape of its body, allowing it to catch slower moving prey. Another adaptation of this shark. If we look at the shark's eye, it's solid black. These guys, they have very, very, very poor visibility. They can't see well. So how do they compensate for that? Their nose. Their nose is very keen in terms of sense of smell. And we know that they're predators and they can detect blood in the water. So sensitive, in fact, that they can detect blood up to a mile away. And these sharks can be at that spot in literally a matter of 10 seconds or less. 1 mile, they can be there. So these guys, they can detect blood from a very long distance away, and I guess that ties into them being quick, fast swimmers. They can get there very, very quickly. Now, how does that help them survive? Well, they can get there before other mako sharks get there and take their food away, and they can catch wounded prey before the prey has a chance to get away. A third adaptation about these mako sharks, well, their teeth. Sharks have several rows of teeth, which help it survive. Now, it only really uses one row of teeth at any given point. But what makes sharks unique is that sometimes, just like humans, a tooth will break off, and then the shark doesn't have a tooth. Well, for you or I, we can go to a dentist, but mako sharks, they don't have dental sharks that can repair teeth. Well, they do have several rows of these teeth, and what will happen is one of those teeth in the back row will pop up forward to replace the tooth that was broken off. Could you imagine being a toothless shark? How are you going to eat? It needs teeth. Another adaptation about these sharks is, well, it sounds kind of crazy, but mother mako sharks give birth to live young. They give birth to live young. So the second that sucker is born, it's swimming all over the place in here. What does mom do? Mom ditches the kids. Sounds awful, right? Well, for a mako shark, it's actually a good thing. Think about it. If mama shark has to tend to 2 little or 3 little or 4 little, however many little mako sharks she has, she's going to spend all of her energy keeping those guys safe, and inevitably she's going to kill herself. Well, if she kills herself, how does that help her kids? Or her, for that matter. So what mako sharks do is they give birth to their young, and then they just take off. That way they can continue to survive. That actually helps the young mako sharks as well because, well, they have to learn to adapt in this type of environment very, very quickly. So they're actually born with the skills that they need to survive right as soon as they get out of childbirth. They can hunt right off the get-go. So that's a few adaptations that mako sharks have. And the last example we're going to talk about for adaptations would be tortoises that Charles Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands. Now we can look at each of these tortoises, very, very large creatures, and well, they're all from the Galapagos Islands, but if you notice, each one of these tortoises is slightly different. Long neck, short neck, smooth shell, kind of horned shell. So each of these adaptations serves each one of these tortoises slightly differently. To keep it brief, each island on the Galapagos is different. So on some islands, the vegetation, the plants that these tortoises eat, it's very, very high up. It grows higher off the ground. Which of these tortoises can survive in an environment where the food is a little bit higher off the ground? Probably this one, because it has a longer neck, so it can reach those plants that are higher up off the ground. Which tortoises could survive better in some of the environments where food is lower to the ground? Well, maybe this one or this one with the shorter neck. So there's a few adaptations of the tortoise in the length of the neck and how it helps it survive a little bit better. Keep this information in mind regarding variation and adaptations. Once again, this will roll directly into a project that you will be asked to create.